Chapter 10. After their terrible ordeal, Chesney and Medea both agreed they needed a day off. So, while the people of Hagudo slowly returned to their homes and businesses, and cleaned up, and Smash got the mine back open, Chesney and Medea quietly returned to their room in the inn, and tried to move past the events of the last 24 hours. Why is relaxing suddenly so hard? Back at school, Chesney was always driven to succeed because he always felt like he was a bit behind the other students. But he never had a problem just letting his mind stop and relax, or goof around. Now, it was like he forgot how. Looking over at Medea, he saw she was focusing on a pile of books she had pulled out of her bag, and not touched. She glanced over and smiled.
Can't figure out anything to do either.
He shrugged.
Well, I don't exactly have anything to do. Come to think of it, everything got burned up in the fire. I basically left with the half-incinerated clothes on my back.
Medea tilted her head.
Oh wow, I guess I never thought of that. Do you like reading? I have a bunch of books I've read already. You're welcome to borrow one.
He considered.
Well, there's that, but, on top of that, I'm finding it really hard to not feel so. Something. Anxious? Antsy? I know my body needs a break, but my mind is not exactly playing nice.
After a time, Medea nodded.
Yes. I know what you mean. I keep feeling like I should be training, or preparing, or something.
Chesney sat up and stretched.
Reminds me of something my mom used to say.
He prepared his best impression of an old fishwife.
You young boys have too much time to think, and get into trouble. Go wear yourselves out and help out at the docks. I don't want to see you back before supper. She was right. I'd get so worn out I'd just collapse into bed after supper. So, want to take a walk? Maybe that will help. That sounds like a great idea.
They stepped out of the inn, and marveled at how much the town had changed in such a short time. The magma lake had quickly disappeared down into the depths of the cavern, and now the only illumination were the soft lights outside people's homes, businesses, and hanging from the edge of the tiers. The ground was still littered with debris, bits of obsidian and other rocks that stubbornly clung to the carved-out town. Hardy Gotham were dashing about the place with pickaxes and wheelbarrows, clearing everything away at speed. He noticed Medea shiver.
Oh, are you cold?
He asked, noticing that she had left her cloak back at the inn. She seemed startled at the question, and hurriedly answered,
What? No. Yes. No. I'm okay. Chesney, don't worry about me.
He nodded, understanding. She must still be dealing with feeling so trapped. I should change the topic.
Hey, do you remember what Zatra said right before he collapsed?
She seemed taken aback by the sudden shift in conversation, before bringing her hand to her chin to think.
You mean how he seemed to be asking for forgiveness from this Lord Zagos? Yeah, exactly. Does that name ring a bell to you?
She laughed.
No, that's hardly surprising. Ratzurk wasn't exactly the gossip capital of Nasquat. True. Did Zatra say anything to you? No. Mostly he just barked orders at me, carried me, pulled me around. I just don't get it,
he said, thinking on the matter some more for a time.
Zatra was an Alorn. Alorn are native to Sasquatch, as far as I know. There's none living here in Nasquat. What was he doing all the way up in Nasquat in the first place? Maybe he was a spy. Do you think he was watching me that whole time, and used the confusion of the attack as his chance to grab me?
Medea asked.
Maybe. But then, how did they even know about you in the first place? And why did they want you? Yeah, that's been bothering me too. I hope now that I'm gone, my dad and everyone are okay, and nobody will attack them again. I wonder how my mom's doing, too. When the rope network got cut in Ratzurk, they completely cut off the island where Rayold is. She probably doesn't even know anything happened to the school.
Medea perked up and smiled.
Oh, you're from Rayold? I didn't know that. I should have guessed when you talked about your fishing village. I probably watched you get taken to school at some point. I was always so curious about people going to the school.
She whispered something else after, but it was too soft for Chesney to hear. She quickly changed the subject before Chesney could ask.
What I don't get is just how coordinated it all was. It doesn't seem possible. What do you mean?
He asked.
Well, when Zatra grabbed me, it was almost immediately after the monster flew in and started wreaking havoc. How could he have known? Well, could it have been good timing? Maybe he had been planning to grab you for a few days, and that was his chance? No. See, that's exactly my point. Considering the timing, something like that just isn't possible. The ship that was coming to take us was coming less than a day since I was kidnapped. How would he have gotten a message to Sasquatch fast enough for them to come? And if it had been pre-planned, he grabbed me at the last possible moment, before he would have run out of time to be picked up. You're right. I barely arrived in time to rescue you. But if he had been much longer, that would have been ample time to organize a rescue team. The timing was spot on. And it just so happens that the monster attacked right then, at the perfect time?
Chesney closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead.
You're right that the timing is too good to be coincidence, but at the same time, that's impossible. I was there. There was no attack, no coordinated effort, going up the tower. It was just a stupid bet. Me and another kid. Can you tell me how it all happened again? If it's not too difficult for you, I mean,
she asked, placing a concerned arm on his shoulder.
I don't mind. Well, there was this new kid that came to the school a while back. Duke. I didn't much like him. He was bossy, and stuck up, and mean. And the weirdest thing was he seemed to have it out for me especially.
She nodded, looking far off in the distance.
Ah, so that's who Duke was. I remember you mentioned him the other day. Okay, go on. Well, that day, he and a group of kids started egging me on, and there was this dare to climb the Tower of Gabnid. He had taken the key, and I agreed because, well, I guess it doesn't matter why. Please, Chesney, every detail is important. It's really not. But fine.
He groaned.
I agreed because I wanted to impress a girl. Oh. And this girl. What was she like? Was she new too? She was really sweet. And popular. Her name was Samsa. And no, she wasn't new or anything.
Medea cleared her throat.
I see. Okay, so, what happened next? When I went to the tower, Duke was there waiting for me, and the door was open. And did you see him unlock it?
She asked.
Well, no. Did you see the key?
He tilted his head, and thought.
Come to think of it, no. He mentioned it, but I never actually saw it. Okay. Go on. Okay. Well, we go up the tower. It was really dark and spooky. Had to fight off a whole group of heliopods, too.
Medea shivered and jumped a little.
Oh, gross. Those things are so blue.
He laughed.
Yeah, they weren't fun. Then, we get in this elevator and get off into this whole really dark, huge room. Narrow walkways everywhere. And at the end there's this glowing device with a depression in the shape of a hand. Duke dared me to put my hand in it, and I did. And then everything lit up, and the monster started forming, and Duke got scared and ran off. And then, well, honestly, I'm amazed I'm still alive. I woke up the next day on the ground, almost dead.
Medea just kept thinking and thinking as they walked.
Tell me what you're thinking. It's okay.
He asked. She sighed.
Really, I don't know what to think. This kid shows up a few weeks back, and suddenly he can get into the tower. That seems a little suspicious, don't you think? What did he look like? I don't know. Just some regular kid. He was senile, and really short. Are you saying Sasquatch hired some kid to spy on the school or something? No, not exactly.
She groaned in frustration.
That seems really far-fetched when you say it like that. But maybe someone tricked him, gave him the key, or promised him something. Yeah, I can see that. He does seem like the type that could be manipulated like that. But, if that's the case,
he wondered,
then the monster of Dalagram was no accident.
Medea finished.
But that's insane. Who could possibly benefit from that? That thing being unleashed on the world?
He countered.
Who knows?
She conceded.
Maybe they didn't know what would happen. Or maybe we just don't have all the pieces of the puzzle yet.
They walked in silence for a long time then, all the way down to the bottom tier, and back up. They avoided interacting with anyone, and stayed close together. At last they found themselves back at the inn, almost 2 hours having passed, and their bodies tired out from the excursion. The thankful proprietor of the inn had thoughtfully prepared a really hearty stew, even though they were the only guests, and there was warm bread, and butter. They ate to their heart's content, bathed, and settled down for the evening in their night clothes. To pass the time, they played cards and taught each other some more of the games they knew. When at last they grew tired enough, they settled into their beds.
Medea?
He asked, after a few quiet moments of thought.
What's wrong? Nothing. Just wanted to ask. Are you still glad you came? Do you ever think about going back home to Ratsurt? Well, I miss them, and I worry about them, especially Dad. When I saw Smash, all I could think about was how Dad would look if he found out I died. But, no, I don't want to go back. Not yet.
She looked Chesney right in the eyes.
I know you wouldn't think badly of me for abandoning my promise, but I really do intend to follow you, as far as it takes, as long as it takes. I'll support you in every way I can. Even with how insanely dangerous it's been. We've only traveled such a short distance, and look what's happened. Who knows what's next? There will be more, and I'm sure it will be worse. But don't forget, Chesney. They were after me for something. I'm involved in this, just as much as you. Maybe even more. Right now, I think the safest place for both of us is to continue this journey and stick together.
He nodded.
You're right. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but you're right. All right. Thanks for today. Let's get some rest and get started bright and early tomorrow. We're so close to Jirain.
She rolled over, curling into her sheets.
What's bright and early mean when you're inside a cave? Shut up, backseat adventurer.
When Chesney awoke the next day, he felt like he hadn't moved an inch the whole night. His body was sore and stiff, but he actually felt more rested than he had in days. No new nightmares this time, thankfully. He had been used to having the nightmare he'd been having since childhood. Darkness, and drowning, thunder, and roaring. But that had completely disappeared recently. In its stead he'd been having much more disturbing dreams. That night, out in the woods had been the worst, but now, whenever he slept, he had that sinking dread that it would come again.
You're looking much better today,
Medea said from the door, holding 2 plates piled high with fruits, cheeses, and nuts.
I brought breakfast. Thanks. I feel better, too. Finally had a good night's sleep. How about you?
He asked, gratefully taking a plate.
Like a log, which is probably why my arm was dead asleep when I woke up. I think I was sleeping on it. I panicked for a second there, but then the sleep wore off and it was tingly for a few minutes,
she said, wincing as she moved her arm around. It was the same one as had been hurt the other day.
How's your arm feeling, though? It's fine, don't worry.
She looked a bit pensive.
Say, Chesney, now that you mention it, I wanted to talk to you about something. And you may not like it, but I want you to hear me out anyway.
Mouth full, Chesney waved her on to begin.
I was thinking about what happened down in the well. and also in Dnieper Mountain. I think we really need more help. With just the two of us, if something happens to one of us, we are seriously at risk of dying. We need someone to watch our backs. We could never have taken out Jarmlu if it was just you and me."
He wasn't exactly sure where she was going with this, so he quickly choked down what was in his mouth.
"I get where you're coming from. That situation in the well was a real eye-opener, for sure, and it was nice to have help in Dnieper Mountain."
Medea nodded and grinned.
"Exactly. We are far too vulnerable when it's just us."
After another handful of food, he continued his thought.
"But the only reason we are doing this in the first place is because we're involved. If Tiger had been interested in helping us, he would have volunteered. And Smash has his job as mine foreman back. Is there anyone else like that you can think of? Or do you mean, just ask some random person to help us?"
She winced.
"Well, no, not quite. I think we should try hiring mercenaries."
His face fell into a scowl.
"You want to trust our backs to a bunch of greedy, self-serving, pompous—"
She held up her hands placatingly.
"I just want us to consider it, Chesney. See what's available. I'm not a fan of the idea either, but I also know we can't judge all mercenaries just how those two jerks and rats are."
"I hate it when she makes sense." He sighed, took another mouthful, and thought about it. She was right in that they needed help, desperately. If that encounter had gone even a little differently, their adventure would have been over. But it was so hard for him to get over the distrust he felt towards mercenaries after they completely abandoned a helpless girl simply because they couldn't be paid their whole fee. That, and then having to find the money to pay them. They would definitely need to keep an eye out for spirit crystals from defeated creatures on the road to pay for mercenaries, supplies, new weapons, and armor. "Do I have a choice, though?"
"All right, I'll grant you that. Maybe we should start looking for outside help. But where are we even going to find some?"
She perked up.
"Aha! I know just what to do about that."
At Chesney's raised eyebrow, she continued.
"I was talking to the innkeeper, and they said that there's a second tavern, and mercenaries hang out there."
"Ugh, you have an answer for everything, huh?" Chesney sighed, then smiled.
"All right, I know when I'm beat. Let's stop by as we get ready for the journey." "Excellent. Speaking of that, I think I saw a weapons and armor shop on the lower level. We should probably upgrade. I don't think this gear is really cutting it."
Chesney took a look at all the dents and scratches and grime on his armor.
"Yeah, you're not kidding. Hope it's running now."
They left the inn, thanking the proprietor for letting them stay on the house. Once they reached the tier below them, they decided to go say goodbye to the mayor of Hagudo properly before they left. Knocking on his door, they found that he was in much brighter spirits, as though he was a dozen years younger. No longer drooping, he was almost stomping across the house and working through a mountain of paperwork.
"Oh, you two, the heroes of the town. Thank you so much for everything you've done."
He beamed upon seeing them, abandoning the work to greet them properly. On closer inspection, Chesney noticed he'd even polished his shell. Medea smiled gently.
"Hello, Mr. Mayor. Well, I know Hagudo could have pulled through on their own, but I'm glad we could help things along. We just wanted to pay our respects before we left to continue our journey to Jurain, and wish you and Hagudo the best."
He smiled and shook his head.
"Pooh, so kind, paying respects to an old fuddy-duddy like me. I hope everyone in town has learned a little lesson about self-reliance. Now, you said you're off to Jurain?" "Yes, we are on a journey to speak with a woman there named Daphne,"
Chesney said, nodding along.
"Why yes, I was going to suggest just the thing. Dark times are about on Lennis, I think. You know, she's an amazing spiritualist, I've heard told. I've even heard many people consider her to be the second coming of Gabnid himself."
Chesney tried to feel around in his mind about what he knew about Gabnid. He wasn't nearly as informed about the history of Lennis as he should have been. It definitely wasn't his favorite subject. He knew that Cormu, Sophie, and Gabnid had come to Linus, and they helped lead Linus into a new golden age. Sophie brought love to Linus. Cormu brought courage to Linus. Gabnid brought wisdom to Linus. The people of Linus praised these three great ones, and the immortals of Rega. He hadn't forgotten that he wanted to know more about them. Why was that ancient machine in the Tower of Gabnid? Why did they come, and from where? He wanted to know more. He decided he couldn't just not ask.
Sorry to ask, but what can you tell us about Gabnid?
The old godam perked up, obviously quite excited about being asked to share his wisdom.
Well, I can tell you that 10,000 years ago, Gabnid actually created Hagudo. That's right. Back then, Linus was a much less populated place, with all sorts of factions and wars. But Gabnid shared everything he could about magic, to everyone. It didn't matter if you were from Nasquat or Asa Asquat. The hero Cormu and Gabnid traveled all across Linus, leading the people, freeing them, teaching them. Hagudo has never forgotten the great kindness of Gabnid for making this home for the godam. That's why I was so fierce in my determination to protect it. Now, I think this doddering old man has kept you long enough. Go, and be safe. Good luck on your journey.
Well, that aligns with what I've heard, though that doesn't tell me too much more than I already knew.
How about you, Midia? Do you know anything about the Great Ones?
He asked. Thoughtfully, she removed her crown and looked at it, touching the large dark blue tear-shaped gem at the center.
No, not really. We prayed to them, back home. Almost always. Though, I would pray just to Sophie for guidance. She doesn't get a lot of attention in the legends, next to Cormu and Gabnid, but I've always felt like I understood her feelings. Or maybe, that she would understand mine. Someone who is meant to protect everyone.
She looked up to Chesney.
Do you get what I mean? Yeah, and I bet you're right.
She put it back on.
I still don't know what having this means. I just know that me having it feels right, somehow. But, is that blasphemous?
Chesney chuckled. He had never been remotely religious. Everything he knew about them came from a dusty lecture he'd only half paid attention to. He did look up to Gabnid, but merely because he was the progenitor of all spiritualists.
You're asking the wrong guy on that one. But, no, I don't think so. It found itself to you, and I feel like that is significant.
But, Daphne, being the second coming of Gabnid, Midia getting Sophie's crown, and the tower opening after 10,000 years? That can't be a coincidence. I just have no idea what it all means. Not yet, anyway. The next stop was the tool and general store. The shelves were stocked with food, travel gear, bottle refill service, and even a few books and small travel games, toys, and clothes. They walked the store together, grabbing what food they needed and putting it in a basket. Chesney was turning to head to the counter to pay, when he noticed Midia stop at a shelf. It was full of used and discounted books. He had barely noticed the books, since he was concentrating entirely on food and supplies. He probably should have looked, since he didn't have anything to really do on his downtime, but the thought of really doing anything remotely like fun just felt like an alien concept still. That kind of thinking was likely going to be a problem, he knew, but he had no idea how to change it. Maybe he just needed more time.
Find something?
He asked. Just because he was unable to relax didn't mean she should too. She shook her head almost imperceptibly and joined him.
No, it's nothing.
He shrugged and went to the counter. He plopped the basket up on the counter.
These, and I had some things to sell. Oh, and some bottles need to be refilled as well.
He pulled out his minocetamol and anticetamol. Midia pulled out her minocetamol. He dumped a few oily spirit crystals onto the counter, and the feathered hat that the screw had given him. It was the same store owner from earlier who had refused to leave, fearing looters.
Humph. I suppose this is a fair trade. Remember, I'm back up to normal price now.
Midia's expression turned angry.
Excuse us? Considering we saved not only your store, but your life, you can't even give us a discount?
The Gotham shopkeeper was not impressed by the little girl's display.
And you can thank me for having food and supplies available for sale in the first place.
He sighed.
But fine, I suppose I do owe you. Here. I'll give you a better price than normal for the crystals, and I'll fill your bottles for free. This one time.
He slid across some money, then went to grab a heavy jar from under the counter. After counting how many pills were in each bottle, he carefully counted out some from the large jar, and filled all 3 bottles with them. Chesney tilted his head, concerned the shopkeeper had made a mistake.
Wait, that one's anti-cetamol. It's different from the other 2.
The shopkeeper stopped what he was doing and looked at him like he was the dumbest person in the world.
Kid, it's not the pills, it's the bottles. Didn't you ever wonder how we refill all the different kinds of bottles out there? The bottles. How does that work?
He looked over at Midia, who also shrugged. Evidently this was news to her as well.
Ugh, you country bumpkins. Look.
He heaved a long-suffering sigh and picked up a bottle.
See all this writing? It's Reagan. They look like regular old bottles, but it's some kind of ancient technology or magic or something. The 3 great ones spread these and a bunch of other miraculous things all over Linus, and taught people how to make the refill capsules. When they go into the bottle, they are changed to whatever kind of product the bottle was meant to manufacture. Those bomb smash used to destroy the tunnel? Same deal. Bomb bottles.
Midia seemed excited.
Oh wow, I never knew that's how that worked. Where do they make the bottles? How? Even? Weren't you paying attention? They only taught us how to make the refill capsules. All the bottles you'll find all over Linus, they're from the beginning. They're not making any more of them.
Taken aback, Chesney looked at his bottles. They looked maybe a bit dirty, but he wouldn't have imagined they were 10,000 years old. Whatever they were, however they were made, that they lasted this long and still functioned was beyond imagining. Why am I just finding more and more mysteries, and no answers, about the past? Pocketing their money, bottles, and new items, the pair left the shop. Stamping her foot in frustration, Midia said,
Ugh, what a jerk. He barely even acknowledged all the work we did to save Hagudo, and then he talked down to us like that too.
She stuck her tongue out at the building.
New who?
The display made him smile, which he tried to hide by coughing.
All right, let's just hope the weapons and armor shop is a little more agreeable.
Halfway there, Chesney had a thought.
Hey Midia, could you wait here a moment? Wait here. Why? Sorry. I think I forgot something in the shop, and I don't want to make you go back in there.
She crossed her arms.
Well, you're right about that. If I see that cranky old fool again, I'll kick him in the shin.
If she did, she'd probably hurt her own foot, hitting his armor-like carapace like that. Not that I'm going to say that to her, of course. Alone, he jogged back up to where the shop was, and went inside. There, on the shelf where she had left it, was the book Midia had been looking at. Duskfall. Never much of a reader, he of course was unfamiliar with the book, or the author. Why did Midia not ask me if we could buy it? We could have talked about it. Realization slowly dawned that this might have had something to do with what had happened in the well. Does she think that any distraction from the quest is wrong? He couldn't deny that right now he felt something similar. But he also knew in a small part of himself that he wouldn't always feel that way. The pain was never gone, but it was less noticeable with Midia around. With her support, he didn't feel so desperate and alone. He didn't want Midia feeling like that, though, ever. He glanced at the price. It wasn't even that expensive, not in comparison to their other expenses at least. Scanning the rest of bookshelf, his eyes glazed. He still couldn't even really bring himself to explore the idea of anything like this for himself. He just wasn't ready. But Media shouldn't have to feel like that.
I'll take this. Hi, I'm back. Sorry about that.
He said, a bit out of breath from the return jog.
What did you forget anyway?
It took him a moment to remember the lie that had helped him make his escape.
Forget? Oh, I thought I dropped my wallet, but I had it with me the whole time.
Sighing, she said,
Well, I'm glad you didn't lose it. That would be bad.
If he gave the book to her now, he knew she would simply argue with him and say to return it, and give a dozen reasons why. So, he would wait until it was too late to say anything. They proceeded down the rest of the way to the weapon and armor shop. They spent some time looking around, talking softly about what would work and what wouldn't, and also what they could afford. Finally, Chetsney carried a big armful and dumped it on the counter.
Hi there. We'll take these. Thanks.
There was a slightly sturdier and well-built set or armor for Chetsney, as well as a short sword to replace his dagger. The kind of foes he'd been facing lately, and would be facing in the future, needed something a little more substantial than the small dagger he'd been using until now. I'm sure if I faced someone like Zatra again who wasn't pulling any punches, even now, I would probably fail. I need to practice with this thing on the road. As for Medea, she found a protective leather armored dress with small plates of metal sewn into the pleated skirt, and on top of that, a bow. She reasoned that if her primary role was support, she couldn't be fighting in the front. Hopefully, a new mercenary would help to fill the gap. Dubiously, the shopkeeper looked them up and down. In his gruff, Gotham voice, he said,
You two are just kids. I'm not going to sell a couple of kids' weapons.
Gritting his teeth, Chetsney raised his arms to show off the bracers.
See these scratch marks?
He removed the front plate of his armor to show off his tunic still covered in bloodstains.
And all this blood? I need better protection. This isn't a game.
Sudden realization dawned.
Oh, you two must be the ones who helped Smash, right? Well, I guess I could sell them to you then, seeing as how you seem to know what you're doing.
Chetsney was about to say something sarcastic when a hand touched his shoulder. Medea spoke.
Thank you, sir. We truly appreciate it.
After they left, Chetsney was still steaming.
Are we going to have to deal with that all the time? What a hassle. Well, I'm sure it will be annoying from time to time, but can you really blame someone not wanting to sell a bunch of dangerous weapons to a couple of kids?
Looking at his hands, he said,
I just don't feel like a kid anymore, I guess.
With all other preparations done, they made their way down the lowest tier in Hagudo, which had been submerged when they had first arrived in town. Amazingly, after some work, it looked like nothing had happened here at all, and most of the residents had already returned. It was very easy to find the bar. Why a town like Hagudo needed to was anyone's guess. Perhaps there was even more to the town than he could see, and they'd only scratched the surface? Could these tunnels be filled with other towns, and Hagudo was simply the easiest to get to from the surface? He wondered at how much more was happening beneath his feet than he could have ever guessed. Stepping inside, it was a lot quieter than the other one had been. Thank the immortals. He'd gotten enough playing for a month from the last bar. There were a few groups of Gotham chatting in a lively way, happy that their homes and businesses had been rescued, and a few who were quietly drinking alone. Chetsney walked up to the bar. Time to swallow my pride again, I guess.
Well, hello there, kids. I don't have much for people your age, but would you like some milk?
I'm going to break something. As politely as possible, Chetsney elaborated.
Thank you, but no. I was wondering if there were any mercenaries in the bar right now that I could speak to.
The bartender rubbed his face in thought.
Come to think of it, yes. There was one younger fellow who sat down not too long ago. Said he was looking for work. Sat right over there,
he said, gesturing to a Gotham sitting alone. His skin was thick and sea-green, with a yellow plating on his head with little stud-like growths across the forehead. His horns were quite long, and red. He seemed perhaps younger than Smash had been, if the shininess of his plating was any gauge to go by. "Here we go, I guess." Chesney walked across the bar with Medea, and they both asked if they could sit with the man for a moment. When the Gautam spotted them, he smiled a knowing smile and gestured to the 2 seats in front of them.
"Aha! I knew you two would be along eventually,"
the Gautam said, grinning.
"My name is Gorf, first servant in the house of Smash. Smash was explaining to me how he wished he could help you two continue on your journey after everything, and so I volunteered to join you on your trip to Jerain on his behalf. Smash has been very generous to me, and I'm happy to repay the kindness. You don't even have to pay me. If you'll have me, we can leave right away."
He lifted his pack from under the table. Taken aback at the situation, the pair looked at each other as if wondering what to say. The man had seemed to explain himself before a single question could be uttered. And really, who could beat Free? Deciding he still had to be sure, Chesney asked,
"Well, just so we are clear, I wanted you to know that it's going to be dangerous. Have you ever been a mercenary before?"
Gorf laughed.
"Ha! Been a mercenary before?" he asks. "It's what I did before Smash's house took me in. But I was reaching the time in my life where I needed stability more than money, and so I stayed on. I do still have my duties here, of course, so once I know you're good and settled where you need to be going, I can return with a clear conscience. So, what are we waiting for?"
Medea shrugged.
"I guess nothing. Let's go. I'm Medea, by the way."
Smirking, Chesney offered his hand.
"And I'm Chesney. Pleasure to meet you, Worf." "Well met, friends. Smash told me all about you. Well, mostly. I don't rightly know why you're heading off to Jerain, actually. That's okay. We can chat on the way."
So, they set off. He led them to a new set of stairs that rose up into a cavern very similar to the one that had led them to Hogudo in the first place, with pulsing lichens on the walls. Thankfully, it was much less warm. While they walked, they explained, in general, that they were traveling to Jerain, and why, though of course they left out any of the gory details and skipped over much of how the problem began in the first place. He took it rather well.
"By Gabnid, you kids are telling me that some kind of terrible monster is out roaming Lennis, causing all this chaos?" "We can't prove that, exactly,"
Medea offered.
"But in my gut I feel it is 100% the case. And the only ones doing anything about it are you two kids. Is that right?"
Chesney winced.
"Well, we were kinda hoping once we reached Jerain that Daphne would have some more resources. Or, at the very least, know what to do next. We would have gotten there sooner, but it seemed like everywhere we went, something blocked our path."
Gorf's face took on a dark expression.
I feel like this beastie of yours seemed to have had a plan all along. Seems too coincidental to me that the only folks who know what's going on got waylaid at every turn."
They all nodded. It seemed very likely. As they walked the cave, more creatures would come out of dark crevices. With a new backup, Chesney tried limiting himself to only using his new short sword to get more practice with it. When things got too hairy, though, Gorf would yell at them to get back, and he'd toss out a pellet from his own bomb bottle, just like Smash had, and explode everything in their path. Medea was almost always right by his side. If he took even the slightest damage, she would heal him first. Gorf, of course, wouldn't notice this as a slight departure from her previous behavior, but Chesney did. He just wasn't sure how to bring it up. The air in the cave was beginning to feel even cooler, and though they hadn't noticed how stagnant the air had been since they descended into Hogudo, once they felt the fresh air of outside again, it was the sweetest thing in the world. They rushed forward, eager to see sunlight. After another 2 turns, there it was, the cave mouth. Chesney squinted.
"I can barely even stand to look, but immortals, I miss seeing the sun."
Not that there was much sun to be had. The sky was filled with roiling black clouds, and not too far from the cave, a terrible downpour was drenching the landscape. From the cave mouth stretched a short plain, interrupted by a river gapped by a long stone bridge. And beyond that, finally, lay Jerain. To no one's surprise, the black clouds and rain were centered right on top of it. Midia seemed to slump for a moment.
It seems there is no end to our troubles.
The moment passed quickly, and her face became determined, if a bit too neutral. She's pushing herself again.
Let's take a bit of a break before we start trudging through the rain,
he suggested.
Oh, okay,
she replied, looking like she wasn't sure what to do with herself. Gorf, for his part, sighed in relief.
Pooh, you kids sure set a pace. I haven't fought like that in years. Actually,
Chesney began, unsheathing his short sword.
Since you were a mercenary for so long, and you wield that pickaxe so well, I was hoping maybe for a few pointers.
Gorf smiled.
Huh. I got a feeling you could teach me a thing or two. But sure, I had in mind to let you know of a few gaps I noticed. Come here. When you're going in for a full attack, I notice there's still some hesitation, and you lose a lot of power. But if you hold your weapon this way, it gives you a better chance to recover after, so you don't need to hold back so much. You need to commit.
While Chesney and Gorf went through some basic practices and drills, Midia eventually seated herself and fell into meditation. After a half hour, Chesney called a stop to the exercise, and sat down on a nearby rock to rest his tired body.
Woo! Thank you, Gorf. I think I'm starting to get the hang of this. Welp, never forget the #1 rule of being a mercenary. Don't die out there. As long as you can remember that, you'll pick up the rest.
#1 rule of being a merc. Don't die out there. No use to anyone when you're dead. Remember that. See you around. Chesney laughed.
Ha! That one I know. Got told that by some real jerk a while back, but I got the message.
Suddenly, Midia was on her feet, running towards him.
Chesney, look out!
In a flash, she tackled him to the ground, covering him with her body. He was knocked half senseless by the surprise tackle, and could barely manage to gasp out,
Midia, what are...
And then he saw it. The stone he had been sitting on was moving. A great, huge, hateful yellow eye blinked at him. The next heartbeat later, it vaporized in an incredible explosion. The earth shook, and rocks and dirt were blown all over the clearing. Chesney could hear dozens of impacts plink off his and Midia's armor, though she took the brunt of the explosion and cried out in pain.
Are you okay, Chesney?
She gasped, rolling off of him. Her limbs were trembling. Blood began to seep into her clothes. Chesney scrambled to his feet and knelt at her side. Gorf, whose stiff skin mostly protected him, knelt down on her other side.
Forget me. Midia, you're a mess. I'll be fine. Just give me a minute,
she said, trying to smile, one eye beginning to swell shut.
Give me a minute, she says. Gorf, go get me some gauze and a blanket from the pack,
he shouted, and the Godam hurried to do as he was told. Chesney then turned to Midia.
What were you thinking?
In moments, he gently wiped away the dirt and rocks, and started gently cleaning her wounds. When that was done, he took the gauze and pressed it firmly on a spot on her leg which had been bleeding badly.
I wasn't really. I looked up and I saw the rock was moving. I'd heard of them. Black bombs. And I knew that if I didn't act right then, you'd be hurt.
Gorf draped the blanket over them both, as Chesney held Midia in his arms.
They're a kind of monster you'll find in the caves. Rock bombs. But sometimes they wander out here too, and the outdoors changes those black bombs are right nasty pieces of work. We're lucky.
Gorf wiped a tear from his face.
Ugh. I should have been on the lookout for something like that. I'm going to take a look around and make sure there's no more nasty surprises.
Chesney had never even heard of creatures like that. He couldn't believe something so insanely dangerous and vicious existed.
Well, you saved my life, Midia. Thank you.
He held her under the blanket while she closed her eyes and began to concentrate. He presumed she was drawing on the power of the crown to heal herself. I still don't understand why that crown can do what it does. All magic comes at a cost, the cost of your own life energy. And I've never, ever heard of a magic that could heal. Will it ever run out, or just stop working? What will we do if it does? And is it safe? Soon, the trembling stopped, and her breathing came soft and evenly. And a few moments later, it became very awkward as they both realized that they were now very close together, holding each other.
I'm fine now. We should get going,
Medea said, stammering, and making to get up. She grabbed the blanket and tried to fold it back up, but just ended up rolling it into a ball.
Medea, come on. We should probably rest a little longer at least.
She looked down at the almost waist-deep crater.
No, I just want to go.
She plastered on a smile.
I'm fine, really. Let's go. Please.
Well, my little plan to rest certainly backfired, he thought ruefully to himself.
Fine diet. But, promise me you'll tell me if you feel lightheaded or anything, okay?
She nodded. She even looked like she meant it. Gorf returned with nothing further to report, so they packed up their bags, prepared to get drenched, and set off to Jurain. In less than an hour, they were in the thick of the storm. Rain was coming down like they were standing under overloaded eaves. Mud squelched beneath their boots, making the way slow and precarious. On the plus side, they never saw any more monsters or creatures on account of the weather. As Gorf explained, this area was actually rather notorious for snakes. Great. Add that to my list of worries. Jurain loomed over them under the shadows of the great storm cloud. It was a huge city, by far the biggest he'd ever seen in his life. The streets were paved with interlocking bricks, and lined with benches, green spaces, and wildly colorful buildings that all seemed made by the same designer. It also seemed to be made into concentric circles of streets, each higher up upon the hill than the last. The skyline, however, was dominated by an imposing structure looming into the dark, rainy sky. It was right in the middle of the entire city, with a strong base, then a very long cylindrical structure reaching up, with an ornate building at the top. It was all designed to look like a massive Sophie lily, with its blue stamen and pink petals. There seemed to be something within the blue stamen, but it was impossible to see from here, like a giant glass ball. The storm seemed to be buffeting the structure terribly, however, and even from this great distance they could see that the flower-shaped building was swaying back and forth.
Ach, that can't be good.
Gorf chimed in beside them. Chesney groaned.
Is it so much to ask to find a city or town that isn't in some kind of peril? With our luck, yes,
Medea said, smiling. When she looked at his face, she must have seen the weariness there, so she drew closer and added privately,
Don't worry. Answers are coming. This will all work out, okay?
I'm being comforted by the girl who was half dead less than an hour ago. I must look pretty bad. If he did, he had no idea what to do or change to make it better. He had a relatively good sleep. He wondered if maybe that he might never be the way he was before. That thought didn't make him feel numb, though, just sad. So, maybe there was something left after all. He worked on a smile, as genuine as he could manage.
Yeah, I know. Thanks.
They trudged up the bridge to Jurain in the middle of the downpour. Howling winds tore at the cloaks, and soon whatever dry parts they had left were just soap. Well, isn't this familiar? The huge flower building far above the city above them swayed dangerously.
One thing at a time,
he told himself. Just as they were entering the city, a guard posted to one side came into view. He looked like he didn't even know what dry used to be like.
Welcome to Jurain, the biggest, most beautiful city in all of Nasquat,
he drawled with obvious sarcasm.
You folks crazy, or what? Bit of both, I think, sir,
Medea said, smiling despite the horrendous weather. The guard laughed.
Okay, You guys are alright. You're obviously not from Sasquatch, so how can I help you?
What does Sasquatch have to do with this? B.I.E. Saving that for later, Chesney piped up, shouting over the wind.
We're looking for Daphne's house. Is she up there?
He gestured to the flower monument. The guard shook his head.
Nah, that's over down that way. Second house on the left.
Chesney made his thanks and started his windswept march in the right direction. There was new energy in his step, finally having his destination in reach. Finally, help, Tut, answers. His back felt surprisingly light and heavy at the same time. Pressure, that's what it was. Like there was a momentous event coming, and the whole world could feel it. Daphne must know what's going on. She's the greatest spiritualist in the world. She probably has a plan, and everything. I bet she didn't even need me to trudge all the way over here. She can see well enough that the world is in peril. So, why is everything in Geraint still broken? The trio marched past homes and businesses on this, the bottom tier of the city. The bright cobbles that made up the wide street were darkened with rain and mud from what must have been an incessant downpour for days, probably since that monster was unleashed, like everything else. There, second house on the left, a simple-looking home, but the landscape was covered in flowers, and the door above the house had a very familiar symbol above it, the same teardrop as on Sophie's crown.
Well, if that's not a sign, I don't know what is.
Chesney laughed, maybe a little awkwardly. But he didn't care. His ordeal was almost over. Knock, Tut. Knock. Knock. Soon, the door opened, and a warm light filtered through. A matronly-looking Laffery woman in her 30s answered.
Oh, my. Guests on a day like this. Well, come in. Come in. You must be freezing.
Gratefully, they did so, apologizing for dripping all over the floor. The home was warm with a fire at the hearth. The walls were decorated with all sorts of spiritualist symbols, long spools of deep velvet cloth, bookcases filled with old books, and the air was filled with incense. It almost looked like the home of a fortune-teller.
It's so amazing to finally meet you. I've been journeying to meet you for what feels like forever.
Chesney said, sighing gratefully, as though that great weight was sliding off his shoulders. The woman, though, turned her head quizzically at him.
Meet me? Are you meaning Daphne?
At his nodding, she continued.
Oh, no, I'm so sorry, but she's not here.
Stunned silence. It was a few long, awkward moments where nobody spoke. No, it can't be. Not again. I was free. I was supposed to be free. He should speak, or cry, or think, or something, but it was like he was completely paralyzed. That time had stopped. This was impossible. Impossible. His veins turned to cool ocean water. All the feeling was going out of him. That familiar numbness was seeping back in. Medea tugged his arm, whispering,
Chesney. Chesney. Are you okay? Say something.
She tugged on his arm again.
You're scaring me. Chesney.
He swallowed and shook his head to clear away the growing numbness.
Where is she? Will she be back soon? It's incredibly important we speak with her.
The woman tilted her head the other way, and thought for a moment.
Well, I'm not sure when she'll be back. Really? She got so fed up with that useless mayor. She just up and left one day, went up north, past the northern checkpoint.
She shivered.
Can't imagine why. It's awful past there. Just caves and forests and swamps. Not a city or settlement anywhere. Said something about Sasquatch. That's the only way to get there. You see. Left me to look after her things here. Can't say as I was too sad to not have to follow. Let me tell you.
His heart was beating like a hammer in his chest.
So, now, I have to go somewhere else, up north, to find her?
The matronly lady winced.
Well, the thing about that is, the mayor has sorta closed up the northern checkpoint. There's no going in or out right now.
Chesney collapsed to one knee. That weight, that pressure, returned. Worse. So much worse. He couldn't hold himself up. It was just too heavy. And all that pressure had to go somewhere. He exploded in rage.
This is ridiculous. Do you have any idea what the hell I've been through to get here? And what's at stake? The whole goddamn world is falling apart, and Daphne, the greatest spiritualist in the world and second freaking coming of Gabnid, decides to up and leave.
The woman was startled by the sudden outburst and tried to stammer something, but it all came out as garbled nonsense and senseless apologies.
Chedsney,
Medea began, her voice steeped with worry.
There's nothing she can.
But he couldn't be contained by just words. There was so much pain, he couldn't hold it in any more. This was impossible. It was unfair. It was so wrong and awful. And why was this all dumped on him? Hadn't he suffered enough? Would the world crush him and crush him until he was dead? Was that his penance?
There's no way. After all this, it was for nothing. No, this is impossible. Some kind of misunderstanding. You're wrong,
he yelled, pointing a finger at the woman.
She's got to be somewhere here. Everyone told me. This is where she is. Even the guard. Where are you hiding her?
Heat was filling his body, filling the room. Steam began to rise from his damp clothes. A soothing, cool breeze entered his body. There was an arm around him. Medea, a terrified look on her face.
No. Chedsney, it's okay. Stop. Calm down. Breathe. Deep breaths.
Medea yelled, holding him tight as his legs buckled and he slumped to the floor.
I think the lad needs a bit of a place to lay his head for a spell,
Gorf said, leaning down and bracing Chedsney on the other side. With a twinge of worry in her voice, the woman said,
Oh, there's an inn just nearby. I'm so sorry I can't help. I wish I could do something. Here, take this.
She handed a card to Medea.
Take this to the inn, show them that, and say I sent you to them and to hold you up as a favor from Daphne.
Gorf and Medea were at either side of him as they led him out the door, insensible. Medea called back.
No, it's fine. You told us where to go next. And thank you so much. We will take it from here. I'm so sorry. Please forgive him.
They hauled him away into the darkness of the storm, the worried woman silhouetted at the door against the warm light of the fire, watching with worry, until they disappeared entirely into shadow. She looked up at the swaying flower over Geraint, buffeted by the storm.
Oh, Daphne, you stubborn old crone. Mayor or no, how could you leave with things like this?